Hello everyone, hope you're well, hope you are doing good. Yeah, might be a bit weird seeing my face on this channel, considering what I'm doing now, but yeah, here we go, a new video, and let's just get into it. So, I think it would be fair to say that the album has never been the most commonly executed kind of project when it comes to modern dubstep music. Modern dubstep being the more abrasive, robotic, and kind of futuristic, maxed out dubstep style that we have seen popularized in the last decade or so. The EP is undeniably the more favored route to go down for the most part when it comes to this kind of music. That being said, there is still a decent catalogue of modern dubstep albums lying about, knocking about, that kind of thing, that have dropped in the last decade or so, and today I'm going to be ordering them tier list style. 22 albums from the modern dubstep era because we are in the year 2022, and they are going to be ranking from S at the very top to F at the very bottom, and everything in between. Oh, by the way, S stands for superior or superb. And my oh my people, we are going to be going over the full spectrum of quality, let me tell you that. Now you may be wondering, how did I choose which albums I was going to put in this tier list? Well, the base for me of each album had to be modern dubstep of any kind, whether it's, you know, bro step or death step, metal step, vomit step, whatever. By that, I mean that the majority of tunes on each album had to have that kind of leaning. You know, you can have bits of experimentation here and there, of course, but the driving force of each one had to be modern dubstep of some kind. This would omit producers like, I don't know, Feed Me or Kill the Noise, for example, or Moody Good, who have, of course, made a lot of modern dubstep in their time, but don't have an album where that makes up most of it. It is one LP per artist for variety purposes, of course, although if an artist is part of another alias altogether, like a group or a duo, for example, then you can have two inclusions as it's a different entity and kind of setup altogether. I will not be including very recent albums from the likes of Eptic or Sudden Death or Subtronics, as they haven't been out long enough and don't really have a legacy of any sort, and so it can be quite difficult to know exactly what I think of them in the context of a list of this kind. Not to worry though, the ones I'm going to mention here will more than satiate your appetite. I'm going to be discussing them in alphabetical order by way of artist name, and yeah, like I said, it's going to be the full spectrum from absolute masterpieces to collections that you genuinely do just have to question a bit. This is all going to be based on my opinion, although if an album did get notably good or bad reception from the general dubstep fandom when it came out, then I will be taking that into account when I'm placing it here. Any noteworthy albums I missed, do feel free to drop them in the comments down below, although I think it is a pretty comprehensive list if you ask me. And so, without further ado, like I said, 22 albums for the year 2022, and I'm now going to throw you into the editing of the legend Acyan. I will see you all in a bit.
We are barely alive.
And we kick off here with Barely Alive, and I did have a hard time choosing between their two albums, We Are Barely Alive and Odyssey. The former, their first, is more outright dubsteppy, which makes sense for this video, whilst Odyssey has better production and is a more varied listen overall, I'd say. Ultimately though, it is a dubstep oriented vid, so gonna be going for We Are Barely Alive, which in many ways is just wall-to-wall bangers. There are just so many big hits here, and I do want to list them off, but honestly I'd be going through basically the whole thing. Its big drawback is that there isn't more variety in terms of mood. I mean, it is quite heavy pretty much front to back. And no, a 40-second interlude vocal sample does not count towards variation. But in terms of dubstep, there are just so many clever ideas here. Plus, I think No Time is a fantastic chill moment to have at the end and reflect on the heaviness beforehand. For We Are Barely Alive, I'm feeling a firm A placement. Now, this next one I'm kind of annoyed isn't later on, so we could build up to its excellence a little bit more, but unfortunately B is very early in the alphabet. Borgor's New Gore Order is the most deplorable album of the modern dubstep era. And you might be sat there wondering, Connor, how is it that a dubstep album can be outright deplorable? Well, let me explain. All the female objectification and overbearing, insufferable, brattish hedonism one could possibly dream of. The dubstep is obnoxious and messy throughout, the singing is awful, the lyrics are genuinely abhorrent. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let me direct you towards this example from the beginning of Turn Around. Yep, just gonna let that sit for a bit and allow you all to digest these wonderful lyrics here from Borgor. And you know, I don't really like to use the word trash, but this is genuinely as close to it as you could get. I mean, I'm really not sure how he got away with this music. Maybe there were just so many bros in EDM at the time that ate it up enough to make it super popular. As people have become more aware, Borgor's very much faded into the background, which I think says a lot. And New Gore Order is unfortunately the epitome of his awfulness. Straight in the F. Similar to Barely Alive, I had a bit of a problem choosing between several albums for Code Pandorum, so I resorted to asking the man himself which one he thought I should do. And he replied with the Lovecraftian Horrors, to which I obliged, for many the quintessential Deathstep album. Any LP that pushes forward a particular movement significantly has to be given serious props, I think, and the Lovecraftian Horrors is a great example of that. At nearly 2 hours it feels like a full-length horror feature film. It's the most extensive representation of everything he was about as Code Pandorum. That aspect of it does bring it down for me a bit compared to a Videodrome, for example, which is more varied and feels more concise overall, but I definitely recognise how loved the album is overall and the fact that it's a cornerstone project for such an important subgenre of modern dubstep. For the Lovecraftian Horrors, a solid B placement, I think. Then we have the first group album here, and easily the most impressive in my opinion, The Invasion by Destroyed. Excision, Downlink, KJ Sorka, and various others, notably Space Laces. I have to say, there's hardly a bad idea or decision made here. A lot of them are exceptional actually, and every track has got multiple things going for it. The production's good, there's a fair amount of variation beyond the dubstep, and that kinda alien overlord theme is kept up very well across it. Any music that places you directly in a particular image deserves extra points in my book, which is of course relative, but it's especially the case for me with this LP. And importantly, put together by 3 people. I mean, the amount of deliberation there must have been between different sounds and ideas and just everything they had to include is a bit crazy to think. And they managed to make something this compelling. To be fair, a couple of tunes are a bit less on point, but mostly it's very concise and compact. Slotting The Invasion right into A.
Well, actually, he just lost the will to make dubstep, but for the purposes of this story, I'm going to embellish things.
Next up we have Dodge and Fusky, and my main thought with them is that they undertook writing an album at the wrong time in their career. An LP's worth of material from their Never Say Die days before they initially disbanded would have worked wonders, I think. And I'm not sure the greatest album of all time showcases the duo at their greatest, far from it. Like, I do get the jokey tone of the album, but I take sadness from that knowing how good they were before. It's almost as if they kind of packed in the seriousness of it altogether. This album for me represents the more commercialized side of dubstep very well, and its potential for being driven by meme culture, which, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just appreciate how authentic their sound was before, which created some amazing ideas. A lot of the ideas here on this LP don't really do anything. Still, there are some solid dubstep cuts here, like Back with a Vengeance and Dog Eat Dog, and it is a funny album at points, to be fair. Gonna be placing this one in D.
Fuck is that?
Following that, we have one that I almost forgot to include but felt like I couldn't leave out in a list of this kind. Dubloads was on a bit of a roll at this point with his Disciple EP releases, but I'm not sure this more extensive collection lives up to the shorter ones before it. To me, 9000 Ghosts feels more like a compilation than an album, just banger after banger, hype after hype, and so getting through it can be a bit of a chore. That being said, it is produced pretty well overall. There's a brilliant range of cartoonish sounds on offer, and it has a very distinctly Dubloads feel to it. In certain parts it is very fun, and the energy of it is on point thanks to the bombastic arrangement. But ultimately there just aren't that many good ideas on show, which is the thing that's going to keep you going back to it again and again. It is mostly just a bit all over the place, so a D placement seems fair. Then we have the modern dubstep godfather himself, Excision, another who it was quite difficult to choose from. The person with the most modern dubstep driven albums to his name, and it came down to which one I felt was the most exciting. For me, that is undeniably Codename X. Kinda like the Destroyed album, there are definite low points here, but the highs are so high that I just can't help but go back to it pretty often. There's enough range in there, both with the genre and the mood. Again, the production's mostly fantastic, and there are some very good collaborations in there. It also feels like a better representation of what he's about than X-Rated, for example, with the overall design just a bit fresher and more updated. Again, there are weak tunes here, but more than that, there's a huge wealth of banger material on show, tracks that I'll never stop loving. Codename X I'm going to be placing next to The Invasion in A.
2012 is a whole next hype.
Moving on, another one of the best groups to ever do it, to do a modern dubstep album, Modestep. A wealth of iconic tracks on their debut Evolution Theory, which I'm surprised didn't inspire a load more bands to do something similar in incorporating dubstep into a rock or metal setting, because it can really work as a combination. To be fair, a lot of the production does feel a bit dated when you hear it today, and the hits do become more sparse as the album goes on, but it definitely isn't easy working together vocals, instrumentation, and electronic production effectively, and they do that for for large parts here. Also, I think you've just gotta love the way they incorporated different influences into the album, from different kinds of bass like D&B to grime and beyond. And you know, it is pretty unique, a classic album of the era to many people. For Evolution Theory, a solid B placement.
Now take it to an
Moving on from there, another where I had to choose between two, and I imagine some people aren't going to like me for doing this, but when it comes to Must Die, I can only go for Death and Magic. I've picked this over Crisis Vision because it's just about more dubstep leaning, and because it's been out longer in the context of this list, I know better what I think about it. Also, I think the way an album opens up is very important as it sets the tone, and Death and Magic blows Crisis Vision out the water on that front with gem shards. The production on this LP is underdeveloped at points, but it is incredible just how many fantastic ideas there are here, stretching across a wide range of different kinds of bass music as well to complement the dubstep. Some of the most clever ideas of the 2010s, and yeah, just hardly any misses here for me. Straight into the A-row, Death and Magic goes.
As long as I don't break these promises.
Then we have yet another that I had a choice with, but at the same time I didn't really have a choice to make because it's so obvious which one to go for. Nero's Welcome Reality is for me the best album of the modern dubstep era. It's a journey through their sound into another world, with all 14 cuts being extremely memorable in different ways and cohering into a perfect collection. I think I can safely say there are no misses on this LP when it comes to individual concepts. Like, beyond the odd nitpick here and there, there's genuinely nothing I would change about it. Each cut holds its own within the collection, and it doesn't get boring at any point over its 1 hour runtime. The production is near immaculate, the ideas are diverse, the musicality is immersive and captivating, the vocal performances are iconic. There is genuinely so little to fault this LP with, and what's incredible is the more I listen to it, the more I appreciate it. In my bass albums of the 2010s vid I dropped a couple of years ago, I placed this second to Immersion, which honestly kinda puzzles me looking back at it. Because really, this is the undisputed GOAT in its field, not just modern dubstep, but the modern bass era overall. No competition, straight into S, Welcome Reality goes. After that, we have Panda Eyes, whose album Kiko has a lot more personality and character to it than its successor Continuation, so that was a pretty easy choice. This album has some of his most memorable tracks on it, from High Score to Colorblind to Keep Going and beyond. Sections of this LP show Panda Eyes at his very best before his production got notably better leading up to his Disciples signing. All of that being said, there are a fair few meh tunes here that make the album drag at various points, and that can be quite trying with a 16-track LP. It can be difficult to distinguish between a lot of them conceptually, and similar to others, I think a lot of the production feels a bit dated. Like, the highs are pretty high, but there's more than enough to put those hits into context, unfortunately. For Kiko, it's gonna have to be a D. Moving on, we have Phase 1, who wrote the definitive Metal Step album in early 2019 with Transcendency. There are some very solid tracks here, from Ultima to Insanity and Demon Hunter with Subtronics, which come to mind initially, and there's some decent experimentation on the LP as well, tracks like Lost with Coven and Digital with Periphery. Unfortunately though, I do find a lot of the dubstep leaning material here to just be a little bit ordinary, and quite a far cry from tracks of previous years like Welcome to Mayhem or UFO. His design and aesthetic are evident throughout, and you can clearly hear it's a Phase 1 album, which I think is quite important, and it is well made overall. But most drops here have always felt quite uninspired to me, and that stopped me going back to it knowing what he's capable of. Gonna put this album in C. Now, not gonna lie, I didn't really want to do this next one because I didn't want to piss off the Riot stans, but yeah, I've never consistently enjoyed Riot's material, and this album sums that up pretty well. I do love the theatricality of their music, you know, it's all very thrilling and they do well to craft a sense of story in their music overall. I just can't say that I enjoy the vast majority of the drops they make. To me, their dubstep feels without a particular motive or aim to it, like it's just wild and heavy for the sake of it kind of thing. Again, the sections in between the heaviness almost all great, and a really good range of influences and genres on show as well. But the heaviness itself, I mean, that's always going to be the focal point, and it's rare that I get a full amount of feeling from it in the same way that I do other bro step leaning material. Maybe I would have enjoyed it more had it come out when I was younger, but hearing it now, I don't feel completely engaged. That being said, like I alluded to earlier, I'm aware of how many people love the album, so I think for its general standing here, I have to take that into account. Dogma Resistance, I'm going to be placing in C. Moving on from there, one of the OG figures when it comes to the transition from original dubstep to the more modern sound, and that is Rusko. His debut LP, OMG, is regarded as one of the most important collections in popularizing the more aggressive dubstep style. I've always loved the opening to this LP with the first 3 tracks, Woo Boost, Hold On, and Rubber Dub Shakedown. Now, if I was to be completely honest, beyond that first few, there aren't that many cuts I really enjoy here. That being said, I love the vibe of the album overall. It's got a distinctly old school feel while simultaneously propelling you into the future of dubstep and all the other styles affiliated with it. I also really appreciate the quirkiness of it. It's odd in the best way and very full of life. Idea quality wise, I'd feel a C, but given its importance in the progression of dubstep and bass music at large, I have to elevate it to a B. After that, another one of the absolute goats, Skrillex, whose debut album definitely treads the line between being a dubstep driven one and not quite. I mean, you could definitely argue it isn't with the amount of material on show that is completely different. However, I feel dubstep plays a big role in the collection, and even those of a completely different style lend a lot from dubstep in terms of sound usage to give it that flavour for a lot of the LP. I must admit, I've never been fully sold on Recess as an entire project. I love the experimental side of it, but a fair few of the ideas here, dubstep included, I just don't find particularly effective. In my opinion, most of the best material on it isn't dubstep, so it's not going to have the highest placement on a list of this kind. That being said, it is an example of a project I can appreciate is very good in spite of not enjoying it as much as others here. I also really appreciate the general fanfare for it, and the dubstep is still pretty good without being exceptional. My temptation is B, but it kinda has to be A. Next up, not that you'd expect much good from an album framed entirely around Vomit Step, but it is hard to find the ways in which Snail's debut LP delivers at all. The fluorescent gurgling gets quite grating and sickly even a couple of tracks in, and it's with this collection that you realise there's only so much of that style one can take at a time. Across the board, there's nothing groundbreaking on offer conceptually, and certainly none of Snail's best tracks are here. It's a kind of style that doesn't allow for a resting point either, so the LP ends up being quite overwhelming as a start to finish listen. This one for me going right in E.
I feel like I'm being watched.
Following on from there, another one of the renowned Metalstep LPs from Sullivan King, but one that I wouldn't rank alongside Phase 1's Transcendency. And if I put that in C, then I think you can imagine what I'm going to say about Show Some Teeth. Now don't get me wrong, Sullivan King has an amazing voice, up there with my favourite vocalist in the whole scene, and I love his guitar playing as well. But the vast majority of the drops here are just not it, in more ways than one. Aimless, loud, overblown dubstep bereft of much ingenuity, and again just that thing of seemingly being heavy for the sake of it. The production is quite rough in those focal moments over the stretch of the LP. Like, there are a couple decent drops towards the middle of the album, but I can't go beyond that. And although his voice is great, the naffness of his lyrics often mars that. There is good here, but it's very much drowned out. Another E for me. Moving on, we have Temenite, another with a few to choose from, and again, I did have to deliberate a bit here. But when it came down to it with Temenite, I find Uprising more impressive than Inception, and Raise the Black Flag hasn't been out quite long enough, so Uprising does feel like the right choice here. It's another that benefits from having an incredible introduction with the opening title tune, one of the most epic of all time in its field. Following that introduction, it is a succession of hugely impressive tracks melding bass, extraordinary musicality, and a range of instrumentation. I must say it isn't all plain sailing with the album. There are a few tracks on it that aren't quite as effective, like Make Me with Said and Rattlesnake with Evil Wave, which I've never found to be quite on a level with the other dubstep tracks we get here. However, I would say they're still pretty sick in the general context of dubstep music. Beyond that though, I think Uprising is a huge feat. The ambition of it is next level, and it's potentially unmatched in its musical scope. When someone has an understanding of musicality and melody like that and is able to blend it into their dubstep, it's unbeatable. It's something I think dubstep needs more of at the moment, and Temenite has it in spades. Raise the Black Flag might end up superseding it over time, but right now this is his most impressive work, which is saying something I think. A lot of this album makes me extremely happy. I can't not put it in A. Next up, many newer fans of dubstep may be surprised to know that Terra Vita have actually been around for quite a while, although when it comes to their 2014 album Rituals, I wouldn't say anyone's particularly missing out. This to me is pretty much as plain as a modern dubstep album has been over the last decade or so, both in terms of ideas and production. Funnily enough, it finishes with a huge bang. Settle the Score is one of my favourite bass tracks of the 2010s. Beyond that, there are a couple flavourful moments here and there, but almost all the drops are so lifeless and straightforward that you can't really get anything out of them, putting this one in E.
I enter the simulation.
After that, the youngest album on this list by some way, the 16-track debut LP from Virtual Riot, Simulation. One of the most long-awaited and highly anticipated albums in modern dubstep history, but at the moment I wouldn't say it's fully lived up to the expectation for it. There are top tracks here from Redline to So Sorry, Exile to Fork Funeral, but are there many beyond that? I'm not so sure. The issue at the moment with Simulation being so young is that it doesn't have a legacy of any sort yet. It'll be interesting to see whether it inspires anything going forward, whether it comes to be one of the important projects of its era kind of thing. Because for now, if it's just down to the music, it doesn't quite reach that top band for me. You know, there's variety aplenty, lots of great production on show, I just can't get behind around half the concepts here. It feels right placing it in C because I'm quite neutral on it at the moment, but loads of people love it and I can definitely see it growing on me more over the years, so let's do the thing and hike it up to B. Penultimately, we have Xylent, another I had to potentially choose between, but I realised if I went for We Are Virtual, I would have got quite the backlash, so here we are with We Are Dust. This is a really good LP with a lot going for it. I must admit, I've never been quite as enamoured with it as others, but it's another where I can definitely appreciate how good it is. The sound usage, the storytelling, the vocal integration, incredibly well made. I mean, yeah, it does excel in many a way. I can see there's loads to it, I just don't get the same feeling from it like I do those in the S and A rows. It's a certain catchiness it doesn't have that the others in front of it do a lot more so. A lot that I can appreciate about it like I've gone over, but personally can't put it higher than B.
Let's get it then.
And finally, another one of the great bass albums, let alone just dubstep, and you know what it is, I mean it's the only great one that I haven't discussed yet, Zomboy's The Outbreak. This album really is just hit after hit after hit. Every single cut is great in some way. Some more so than others, but every one adds several significant things to the LP and carries on its story in an effective way. That story being one of a war between humans and zombies. I mean, you know, that's the picture that comes to mind for me anyway. I mentioned earlier that a great album can put you directly in the image and scene it's trying to create, and Zomboy does that very adeptly with The Outbreak. Very in your face, yet so controlled and well managed across the different genres and ideas it puts forward. The demonic essence of it is completely down front to back, and it's an incredibly concise listen at 10 tracks. Even then, it's still 45 minutes long, so it really leaves a mark on you. Yeah, this album is superb and absolutely one of the very best in the modern dubstep field. Straight into S, The Outbreak goes. Now, a quick mention to a couple of others I didn't include. I obviously just couldn't have every single one in there in the main list, and producers like Savon and Figure, I just couldn't, you know, kind of choose one album from. It was quite difficult to narrow them down, although both of them I definitely do recognise have played a massive part in the progression of modern dubstep in completely different ways, of course. There are others like Flux Pavilion or Zed's Dead, for example, who have been mostly dubstep musicians, but their albums to me felt a bit too pop-oriented for them to be mostly dubstep albums, if you know what I mean. Magnetic Man's self-titled debut, I think for me has just a bit too much of an original feel to be labelled or deemed a modern dubstep album, if you know what I mean, and the same can be said for Casper or Emalke, and a few other names that I could have lobbed in but didn't feel quite compelled to. So we've got AU5, Riot 10, Ulasile, Black Tiger, Sex Machine, The Trickers, X-Core, and Dion Timmer. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the list, hope you enjoyed the video. Very excited to see what you guys have to say down below. Let me know what you would have placed where, which ones you would have included that I didn't talk about. Do not forget, this list from me is completely subjective, so please don't hate me for it. I mean, you can if you want to. But yeah, like I said, look forward to the discussion in the comments down below. And if you did enjoy the video and want to see me do another one of this kind for, I don't know, EPs maybe, or compilations, something like that, then do let me know if you want to see it. I would be more than keen. You know what? Maybe I could do a producer tier list, or maybe that would be a bit risky. But anyway, again, hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell along the way so you can be notified whenever I upload a new video to the channel. And also my Patreon, which is linked down below in the description and the pinned comment, where I drop videos of me reviewing bass music of all kinds every single week. So yeah, keeping up with all the review content and stuff that is coming out. I talk about it all on the Patreon. But yeah, beyond that, catch you in the next one. Peace.